He thought he was stopping a stranger, but he was standing in front of the woman who raised the man who would judge his badge. The afternoon sun rested softly over a quiet neighborhood in Georgia, casting golden light across the driveway of a small family home where 72-year-old Evelyn Carter carefully wiped the surface of her old Cadillac. To anyone passing by, it was just an aging car with a few memories attached to it. But to Evelyn, it was much more than that. It was the last gift her husband had left behind, a reminder of decades of love, sacrifice, and the promise that some things were worth keeping. Every Sunday morning, she polished the same faded blue paint, not because the car was valuable, but because the memories inside it were priceless. She had watched her children grow up beside that vehicle. She had driven Marcus to school in it, taken him to his first job interview, and celebrated the day he earned his first badge. That badge had never been just a symbol of authority to her. It represented the lessons she spent a lifetime teaching him. Respect, patience, fairness, the belief that a person's worth was never determined by their appearance. But on that quiet afternoon, someone looked at Evelyn and saw only what they expected to see. Officer Ryan Mitchell had been driving through the neighborhood when his attention was drawn to the Cadillac parked near the street. A quick glance at the license plate made him slow down. Something about the situation seemed unusual to him. He stepped out of his patrol vehicle and approached Evelyn as she stood beside the car. The conversation began with simple questions, but the atmosphere quickly changed. Evelyn answered calmly. She explained that the car belonged to her and that she had owned it for many years. She offered to show her paperwork and provide any information needed. But Ryan had already formed his opinion. He looked at the situation through assumptions instead of facts. Imagine standing there, holding on to your dignity while someone decides who you are before they ever hear your story. Evelyn knew that feeling. She had lived through moments when people underestimated her because of her age, her background, and the color of her skin. But she had also learned something important from life. Silence was not weakness. Sometimes silence was the strength of someone who knew the truth would eventually speak louder than any argument. As neighbors began noticing what was happening, Evelyn remained composed. She did not raise her voice. She did not lose herself in anger. She simply looked at Officer Mitchell and said, "Young man, one day you will realize this was never about a car." Ryan did not understand those words. To him, she was just another person standing in front of him. He had no idea about the sacrifices she had made, the family she had built, or the son whose name carried respect throughout the entire county. He had no idea that the woman he dismissed so quickly was connected to the very person responsible for protecting the community he served. And he certainly had no idea that before the day was over, everyone would learn a truth that would change the way he saw power, respect, and justice forever. The hardest moments in life are not always the ones where people lose their voices. Sometimes, they are the moments when someone stays calm while the entire world expects them to break. Evelyn Carter stood beside her Cadillac, feeling the weight of every watching eye around her, but she refused to let embarrassment take away her dignity. She had spent 72 years learning that patience could be stronger than anger and that the truth did not need to shout to be heard. Officer Ryan Mitchell continued asking questions, his tone becoming more certain with every passing second. He looked at the vehicle, then back at Evelyn, as if the simple explanation she gave was not enough. Evelyn remained respectful. She explained that the Cadillac had been in her family for decades. She told him that she had every document needed to prove ownership. But Ryan was not listening to understand. He was listening only to confirm what he already believed. The neighbors nearby noticed the tension in the air. A few people stepped closer, wondering what was happening. They knew Evelyn. They knew the woman who brought homemade pies to community events, who helped young families when they needed support, and who always greeted people with kindness. To them, she was not a stranger. She was a familiar face, a woman who had spent her life giving more than she received. But Ryan did not know any of that. He only saw a situation he believed he had already solved. Evelyn looked at him carefully and remembered all the years she had spent teaching Marcus about responsibility. When Marcus was young, he would ask her why some people judged others before knowing their stories. Evelyn always gave him the same answer. Because some people look at the outside before they ever take time to understand the heart. Those words stayed with Marcus throughout his life. They shaped the man he became. A man who would later rise through the ranks of law enforcement not because he wanted authority, but because he wanted to protect people who felt unheard. Standing there beside her car, Evelyn did not know exactly what would happen next. But she knew one thing. She would not allow anyone to make her feel invisible. Ryan glanced around as more attention gathered. Instead of recognizing the situation differently, he became more focused on proving that he was in control. That was the moment Evelyn realized this was no longer about a vehicle. It was about something much deeper. It was about how quickly someone could decide another person's value without knowing anything about their life. She looked at the officer and calmly said, "You should be careful when you judge someone you have never taken the time to know." Ryan heard the words, but he did not understand their meaning. He could not see the years behind Evelyn's eyes. He could not see the sacrifices of a mother who raised a son to believe that justice was supposed to protect everyone. He could not see that the woman standing in front of him was connected to a story much bigger than this moment. A few miles away, inside the county headquarters, Marcus Carter was finishing his daily responsibilities as county police chief. He had no idea his own mother was having an encounter that would soon test everything he believed about leadership. Because sometimes, the people who appear powerless are the ones carrying the greatest strength. And sometimes, the smallest decision can reveal the biggest truth. There are moments when a person's true character is revealed not by how they treat those above them, but by how they treat those they believe cannot challenge them. For Evelyn Carter, this was one of those moments. She stood quietly beside her Cadillac, watching Officer Ryan Mitchell continue to focus on his assumptions instead of the facts in front of him. The afternoon breeze moved gently through the neighborhood, but the atmosphere around them felt heavier with every passing minute. Evelyn had already answered his questions. She had already explained that the car belonged to her. She had already offered to provide every document needed. Yet Ryan remained convinced that he knew the entire story. He looked at the vehicle as if it was the most important part of the situation, but he never stopped to look at the person standing beside it. Evelyn had spent a lifetime understanding that moments like this were rarely about one conversation. They were about the years of experiences that shaped how people saw each other. She remembered when Marcus was a little boy, sitting at the kitchen table after school and asking her why some people were treated differently. She remembered placing a hand on his shoulder and telling him that the world would not always be fair, but he could always choose to be fair himself. Those lessons became the foundation of Marcus Carter's life. Years later, when he became county police chief, he carried those words with him every day. He knew that leadership was not about being the person with the most authority in the room. It was about being the person who understood the responsibility that came with that authority. Meanwhile, Evelyn remained standing in the same driveway, unaware that her son was only a short distance away, continuing the very mission she had inspired in him. Ryan finally asked for more information, and Evelyn calmly reached for her identification and paperwork. Her hands were steady. Her voice was calm. She was not trying to prove that she mattered. She already knew she did. That confidence seemed to frustrate Ryan because he expected fear. He expected someone to become nervous under pressure. Instead, Evelyn simply looked at him with the quiet strength of someone who had faced much bigger challenges than this. A person's uniform should remind them to serve, not make them forget compassion, she said. For a brief moment, Ryan paused. The words reached him, but not deeply enough. He still believed this was just another routine situation. He did not know that people were beginning to pay attention. He did not know that witnesses were remembering every detail. He did not know that the woman he had underestimated was someone whose story carried far more weight than he imagined. Inside the county headquarters, Marcus Carter received a message that changed the direction of his afternoon. It was not a dramatic announcement. It was simply a notification about an incident involving his family name. At first, Marcus thought there must have been a misunderstanding. His mother was one of the most peaceful people he knew. She avoided conflict whenever possible. But when he saw the location and recognized the vehicle involved, his expression changed. That Cadillac was not just a car. It was part of his family history. It represented the woman who had sacrificed everything to help him become the man he was. Marcus slowly stood up from his desk. He did not know every detail yet. He did not know what had been said or how the situation had unfolded. But he knew one thing. Before the day ended, he would have to answer a difficult question, not just as a police chief, but as a son. Because sometimes justice does not arrive from a courtroom or a government building. Sometimes it arrives when someone finally recognizes the value of the person they failed to see. The moment Marcus Carter saw his mother's name connected to the incident, the room around him suddenly felt quieter. For years, he had dealt with difficult situations as county police chief. He had walked into tense meetings, reviewed complicated cases, and made decisions that affected an entire community. But this was different. This was personal. The woman involved was not just a citizen. She was Evelyn Carter, the person who taught him everything he knew about fairness, patience, and doing what was right. Marcus picked up his phone and called her. When Evelyn answered, her voice was calm, almost as if she was trying to make sure he did not worry. That was who she had always been. Even when something hurt her, she focused more on protecting others than protecting herself. Marcus asked what happened. Evelyn explained every detail without exaggeration. She did not speak with anger. She did not ask him to punish anyone. She simply told the truth. That was the part that stayed with Marcus the most. His mother had spent her entire life teaching him that justice was not about revenge. Justice was about making sure people were treated with dignity. Meanwhile, Officer Ryan Mitchell continued standing near the Cadillac, still believing he was handling a simple situation. He noticed more neighbors watching. He noticed phones being held up. But instead of questioning his own actions, he convinced himself that attention meant people were misunderstanding him. He believed his position protected him. He believed the badge gave him the final word. What he did not realize was that a badge was never meant to separate people. It was meant to create trust between them. Evelyn looked around at the faces of the neighbors who had gathered. Some looked concerned. Some looked uncomfortable. She knew many of them had seen situations where people were judged before they were understood. She took a slow breath and remained composed. Every person has a story you cannot see, she said quietly. That is why kindness matters. Those words stayed with the people around her. They were not shouted. They were not meant to create a scene. They were simply the words of a woman who had lived long enough to understand the importance of humanity. A few minutes later, Marcus arrived in the area. He did not come rushing in with anger. He did not come looking for a confrontation. He arrived with the same calm discipline he expected from every officer under his leadership. As his vehicle approached, several people noticed the difference immediately. The atmosphere changed. The officers nearby recognized the vehicle and straightened their posture. Ryan looked over, unsure why everyone's attention had shifted. Then Marcus stepped out. For a moment, nobody said anything. Evelyn saw her son walking toward her, and the smallest smile appeared on her face. Not because she wanted power to solve the problem, but because she knew her son would carry the same values she had given him since childhood. Ryan watched as the county police chief approached the scene. He expected a supervisor. He expected an official conversation. What he did not expect was the first thing Marcus would say. He looked directly at Evelyn and softly said, "Mom, are you okay?" The single word changed everything. The confidence Ryan had carried only moments earlier began to disappear. The woman he had treated like she was invisible was not invisible at all. She was the mother of the person standing in front of him. And suddenly, the situation he thought he controlled became a moment he would never forget. The word that changed everything was not a command. It was not a warning. It was a simple word spoken with love and respect. Mom. In that single moment, Officer Ryan Mitchell realized that the woman standing in front of him was not the person he thought she was. Evelyn Carter was not just an elderly woman beside an old Cadillac. She was the mother of Marcus Carter, the county police chief, standing only a few feet away. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument could have been. The neighbors who had gathered watched carefully as Marcus approached his mother. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the disappointment of someone who had just witnessed a moment that went against everything he believed about service. Evelyn looked at her son and gave a small smile. She did not want anger to control the situation. She did not want her position as the chief's mother to become the reason she was treated differently. She wanted something much simpler. She wanted people to remember that every person deserved respect from the beginning. Marcus turned toward Ryan. For a few seconds, he said nothing. He allowed the moment to speak for itself. The officer who had felt completely confident only minutes earlier now seemed unsure. The situation had changed, but Marcus was not interested in using his authority to embarrass him. Instead, he asked a question that made everyone nearby think. "Officer Mitchell, if you had known who she was, would you have treated her differently?" The question was quiet, but it carried a powerful message. Ryan did not answer immediately, because deep down, he knew the question was not really about Evelyn being the chief's mother. It was about whether every person received the same level of respect. Marcus explained that his mother had spent her entire life teaching him what leadership meant. She taught him that a uniform was not a symbol of superiority. It was a promise to serve. She taught him that authority without compassion was meaningless. Evelyn listened as her son spoke, but she remained humble. She did not want anyone to see her as important because of her family connection. She wanted people to understand that she was important because she was a human being. The neighbors around them began to see the bigger lesson unfolding. This was no longer just about one encounter on a quiet afternoon. It was about the choices people make when they believe nobody is watching. Ryan looked back at Evelyn and the Cadillac. For the first time, he noticed the details he had ignored before. The care she had given that vehicle. The calm way she handled the situation. The dignity she maintained even when she felt misunderstood. He began to realize that he had been focused on proving himself right instead of taking the time to understand the person in front of him. Marcus eventually asked Evelyn if she wanted to go home. She nodded gently. As they walked toward the car, she looked back at Ryan one more time. There was no hatred in her eyes, only a quiet reminder that every action leaves a mark. Ryan remained standing there, facing the uncomfortable truth that the person he underestimated had shown more patience and grace than he had shown understanding. And as the afternoon continued, one question remained in the minds of everyone who witnessed the moment. How many other people had been judged before anyone took the time to know their story? The drive home was quieter than usual. Evelyn Carter sat in the passenger seat of her Cadillac, looking out at the familiar streets she had known for decades. The afternoon sunlight passed through the windows, creating soft patterns across the interior of the car that carried so many memories. Beside her, Marcus held the steering wheel with both hands, but his mind was still focused on what had happened earlier. He had faced difficult moments throughout his career, but seeing his own mother treated without the respect she deserved affected him in a different way. Evelyn noticed the silence and gently placed her hand on his arm. "Marcus, remember what I taught you," she said. "A difficult moment does not give us permission to lose our humanity." Those words immediately reminded him of his childhood. Before Marcus ever wore a uniform, before anyone respected his title, he was simply a young boy being raised by a mother who worked hard and believed that character mattered more than status. Evelyn had shown him that true strength was not about making people fear you. It was about making people feel protected. That lesson was the reason Marcus became a police officer in the first place. He wanted to build the kind of community where people did not have to wonder whether they would be heard. Back at the scene, Officer Ryan Mitchell remained near his patrol vehicle, watching the Cadillac disappear down the street. The confidence he had carried earlier was gone. For the first time, he started thinking about the situation from a different perspective. He remembered every moment when Evelyn tried to explain herself. He remembered how calmly she spoke. He remembered that she never insulted him, even when she felt disrespected. The realization was uncomfortable because it forced him to consider something he had avoided. Maybe the problem was not the situation. Maybe the problem was the way he had chosen to see the person standing in front of him. Later that evening, Marcus reviewed the details of what happened. He did not do it as a son trying to protect his mother. He did it as a leader responsible for understanding the truth. He wanted every side of the story. He listened carefully to witnesses. He reviewed the information available. He looked beyond emotions and focused on facts. That was the difference between justice and personal reaction. Marcus knew that if he handled the situation based only on family feelings, he would be no different from someone who ignored fairness. But if he handled it with honesty, he could create a lesson that reached beyond one person. Meanwhile, Evelyn returned home and placed her hand on the hood of her Cadillac. She smiled softly as she remembered all the journeys that car had carried her through. It had taken her to family celebrations, important milestones, and ordinary days that became special because of the people beside her. To everyone else, it was an old vehicle. To Evelyn, it was a piece of her life. That evening, a decision was being made inside the county headquarters. Not a decision based on anger. Not a decision based on embarrassment. A decision based on accountability, understanding, and the responsibility that came with wearing a badge. Because Marcus knew something important. A uniform could represent authority, but only character could prove someone deserved it. The next morning, the county headquarters felt different. The usual sounds of phones ringing, officers moving through the halls, and paperwork being organized continued as normal. But inside Marcus Carter's office, there was a deeper sense of responsibility. He sat quietly reviewing the details of the previous afternoon, not as a son seeking answers for his mother, but as a police chief searching for the truth. Marcus understood that leadership was tested most when emotions were involved. Anyone could make a decision when things were simple. The real challenge came when personal feelings and professional responsibility stood in the same room. He looked through the information carefully. He listened to the statements from witnesses who had been present. He considered every detail, including the perspective of Officer Ryan Mitchell. Marcus did not want a rushed conclusion. He wanted a fair one. That was the difference between justice and judgment. Meanwhile, Ryan arrived for his shift carrying a different mindset than before. The confidence he once had felt behind his badge was replaced by quiet reflection. He kept thinking about Evelyn's words. Every person has a story you cannot see. At first, he thought those words were just something said in the moment. But the more he replayed the encounter, the more he understood their meaning. Evelyn had never tried to use her connection to the police chief. She never mentioned Marcus. She never tried to gain special treatment. She stood there simply as herself, asking only for the same respect anyone else deserved. That realization affected Ryan more than he expected. For the first time, he considered how many people might have felt the same way when dealing with someone wearing a uniform. How many people had been nervous before they even spoke? How many people had felt judged before they had a chance to explain? Across town, Evelyn continued her normal routine. She watered the flowers outside her home, greeted neighbors, and carried on with the same kindness she had shown for years. She did not see herself as someone who had won a battle. She saw herself as someone who had experienced a difficult moment and hoped others could learn from it. When Marcus visited her later that day, they sat together and talked about what should happen next. Evelyn told him she did not want anger to guide the outcome. She wanted Ryan to understand the importance of treating people with dignity. Marcus listened carefully because he knew his mother's perspective came from a lifetime of experience. She had seen change happen not because people were forced to become better, but because they were given the opportunity to recognize their mistakes. The conversation reminded Marcus of something he often told younger officers during training. The public does not judge a department only by its policies. They judge it by the moments when one person chooses how to treat another. That evening, Marcus made a decision. The situation would not disappear quietly. It would become a moment of learning, accountability, and reflection for everyone involved. Ryan would have to face difficult questions, but he would also have the chance to understand why those questions mattered. Because the greatest lessons are not always found in moments of victory. Sometimes they are found in moments when people finally stop, look closer, and recognize the humanity they almost missed. The following days brought a quiet change throughout the county. There were no dramatic announcements, no public arguments, and no moment designed to create attention. Instead, there was something much more important happening. People were taking the time to look honestly at what had happened and what it meant. Inside the county headquarters, Marcus Carter continued reviewing the situation with the same careful approach he expected from everyone under his leadership. He knew that accountability was not about embarrassing someone. It was about creating a standard that reminded everyone why their work mattered. A badge was not a symbol that placed one person above another. It was a responsibility carried by someone who had promised to serve. Officer Ryan Mitchell was asked to sit down and discuss the encounter in detail. For the first time since that afternoon, he was not focused on defending his actions. He was focused on understanding them. Marcus did not begin the conversation with anger. He began with a simple question. What did you see when you looked at Evelyn Carter? Ryan paused. At first, he thought about the car. He thought about the situation. He thought about the assumptions he had made in those first few moments. But then he realized the question was deeper than that. Marcus was asking him to think about the person, not just the circumstances. Ryan admitted that he had made a judgment before he had all the information. He admitted that he had focused on what he expected to find instead of what was actually in front of him. Those words were difficult to say, but they were necessary. Growth often begins with the courage to recognize something uncomfortable. Marcus listened carefully. He knew that one conversation could not erase the impact of a mistake, but he also knew that people could change when they were willing to face the truth. Meanwhile, Evelyn became the person many neighbors wanted to hear from, not because she had asked for attention, but because her response had touched people. They expected anger from her. They expected frustration. Instead, they saw patience and wisdom. When someone asked her why she remained calm during such a difficult moment, Evelyn simply answered, "Because I do not want one person's mistake to take away my peace." Her words traveled through the community because they reflected something powerful. She understood that dignity was not something another person could take away. It was something she carried within herself. Marcus later visited the neighborhood and spoke with residents about trust between communities and law enforcement. He explained that real change was built through everyday choices. It happened when people listened before judging. It happened when officers remembered that every person they met had a story. It happened when communities and leaders worked together instead of standing against each other. Ryan also began to understand that the moment with Evelyn was not just about one interaction. It was a reminder of the responsibility that came with wearing a uniform. Every decision mattered. Every conversation mattered. Every person mattered. The old Cadillac remained parked outside Evelyn's home, still carrying the same memories it always had. But now, it also represented something new. A reminder that even a painful moment could become a lesson. A reminder that justice was not only found in rules and procedures. Sometimes, justice was found when people chose to see each other clearly for the first time. Weeks passed after that afternoon, but the story of Evelyn Carter continued to remain in the hearts of the people who witnessed it. What began as a difficult moment on a quiet street became a reminder of something much bigger. It showed people that every interaction carries meaning, every decision has consequences, and every person deserves to be seen before they are judged. For Evelyn, life returned to its familiar rhythm. She still woke up early, still cared for her flowers, still greeted her neighbors with the same warm smile she had always shared. The Cadillac remained parked outside her home, shining under the Georgia sun. To anyone else, it was an old car. But to Evelyn, it was a symbol of family, memories, and the journey that brought her to that moment. One evening, Marcus visited his mother and sat with her outside near the driveway. They watched the sunset together, just like they had done many times before. Marcus thanked her for teaching him the values that guided his career. He told her that every decision he made as county police chief came from the lessons she had given him when he was young. Evelyn smiled and reminded him that leadership was never about having the highest position. It was about remembering the people who depended on you. The strongest leaders are the ones who never forget where they came from, she said. Those words stayed with Marcus. They became a reminder that authority without compassion could never create trust. Meanwhile, Ryan Mitchell continued his own journey of reflection. He understood that one moment could reveal something about a person that they had never been willing to see before. He spent time learning from the experience, listening to different perspectives, and understanding that every uniform represented a relationship with the community. The lesson was not simply about one mistake. It was about the responsibility that came with being trusted by others. Over time, Ryan changed the way he approached people. He asked more questions. He listened more carefully. He remembered Evelyn's calm voice and the way she chose dignity even when she had every reason to be upset. Her response had shown him that true strength did not come from proving power over someone else. It came from knowing when to use power responsibly. The community also changed. People who had witnessed the encounter began talking about the importance of respect and understanding. Neighbors who once passed each other without conversation started sharing stories. They realized that behind every door, every driveway, and every face in the community, there was a life filled with experiences they might never know. Marcus often told younger officers about the day he found his own lesson in leadership standing beside an old Cadillac. He explained that the greatest test of character was not how someone treated important people. It was how they treated people they believed had no influence. Because everyone has a story. Everyone has a history. Everyone carries something that others cannot see. Evelyn Carter never wanted to be remembered because of the moment she was misunderstood. She wanted to be remembered because of how she responded. She showed that patience could be powerful, that kindness could be courageous, and that dignity could survive even the most difficult circumstances. In the end, Officer Ryan thought he had stopped an ordinary person on an ordinary day. But he discovered something far more important. The woman standing beside that Cadillac was not powerless. She was a mother, a teacher, and the foundation behind the man responsible for protecting the community. He thought the badge gave him authority. But that day, he learned that true justice was never about the badge someone wore. It was about the humanity they carried inside.